Good afternoon and welcome to the 40th anniversary reunion of journalist fellows from the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism. In the 5 years since the last reunion, there has been a growing recognition within the journalism industry about the importance of journalists' well-being and the impact of moral injury on reporters. Journalists often face challenging and traumatic experiences while covering sensitive and distressing stories, leading to potential long-term psychological effects. Today, we aim to highlight the developments and effective tools that have emerged in journalism to cope with moral injury and improve the overall well-being of journalists. In this panel, Associate Director of the Journalism Fellowship Programme, Caitlin Mercer, will host a discussion about well-being in newsrooms with the President of Media at Australia's largest journalism trade union, Karen Percy, Afghanistan reporter turned RN Bahar Joya, and documentary filmmaker Tashima Brennan. Let's begin.
But thank you so much, firstly, to all of you for coming on a very hot afternoon when you could be hanging out with your friends at the pub, and you've been asked to choose essentially between money and happiness, and you've chosen happiness. So thank you very, very much. If you do want to come in a bit into this centerpiece, please do. I would love that. And I'm also going to prompt you to take a look in the app. There is a poll there for you to participate in, and we can hopefully get that technology working for us in this session. And let's just kick off, basically. Karen. And then Bahar is a fascinating person to have on this panel, because not only has she been a journalist in Afghanistan for many years, she now has transitioned careers into being a nurse and just qualified for ICU nursing, which is a very intensive form of nursing. But I would be fascinated to know which job would you say is more stressful?
Oh, thank you for having me, Caitlin, here, and hello to everyone. Honestly, both of them. So to start from journalism to nursing, let me tell you a little bit of background, why I actually choose, because everyone always asks me, what made you to choose nursing from journalism? So I work for BBC Persian Service as a war correspondent since 2012 to 2016 in Afghanistan. And during this time, I report on so many suicide attacks and bomb blasts and dying of innocent people. And I was the one who was just reporting them. And this gave me lots of trauma. But as Karen mentioned, when it was hit you, for me was 2015. It was an event of killing a young girl in Kabul. I'm sure many of you know that event is Farkhonda's killing. So Farkhonda was a 27 years old girl. She went to a mosque and she was wrongly accused by one of the mullahs there that she actually burned Quran. And it aggravated the anger against her, and there was a mob coming and wanting to kill her. So that day was, I remember that like my lunch today. I can't forget that. That's how trauma can affect someone. So it was on Thursday evening. I was off from the BBC, coming back to from somewhere to home. And then I saw a very big number of people rushing towards something. So I asked the driver, what's happened? He said, it might be a suicide attack. And I say, if it's a suicide attack, why people are not running away and rushing towards it? So we stopped there, and there was some policemen were there. And when I asked them, they said, oh, they're killing a woman. Very relaxed. And I said, you're a policeman, and you're telling me they're killing a woman. He said, yeah, she deserved it because she burned Quran. So I came out of the car, and I tried to rush towards them. And I couldn't see Farkhonda. I just saw something is rolling in the street, and people are stoning and beating and shouting. And I tried to help, the first instinct of any human being. So I rushed towards her and they pulled me back, and actually they beat me as well. So I was on the street and shouting and crying for help, and nobody was there to help me. So this whole incident happened within 1 hour. And I don't know when I became unconscious, and all I saw the smoke is coming out, and people actually burned that girl in front of my eyes. And then I had to go to the hospital. I was hospitalized for a few hours, and then I was so angry. It took me a few steps, Karen, to see what happened, the shock of that, and then acknowledgement and do something about it. So I just removed the serum, which was going IV serum on my hand. I removed that, and I rushed to the BBC office, which was a very close distance from the hospital. And I was the first person who wrote that news, that this is what I witnessed today on the streets of Kabul in Afghanistan, in front of police forces, by people, ordinary people, killing a woman. And I just sent that news, and then my colleagues called me from London, and they told me that we need to confirm this, and there's so many things that she might not be killed by mob. I said, no, I saw that. I was the witness for that incident. And then the next day, what I did, I tried to call so many ministers and officials, and everyone was denying, because Afghanistan is a very traditional country, and Quran is something that no one wants to touch around those topics. So nobody was responding me. And then I wrote on my Facebook account, I said, this happened to this woman. No matter what, I'm gonna go to their house and not let any man to touch her coffin. If there's any brave woman, come and join me. So we went to Farkhonda's home the next day for the funeral, and we took out the coffin, and we did all the ceremony for her funeral. And I did report that for the BBC as well at the same time. So that trauma for me stayed with me for years. And when I came to the UK, I had sleepless nights, I had anger, and I was not able even to communicate with my male member of the colleagues. For example, if a man was shouting, I was paralyzed, and still it's affecting me. If a man is shouting, I suddenly, everything comes back. All the memories comes back. And as we have the sessions, I don't want to go very long for that, is for the well-being of journalists. One of the things which really helped me was this process called EMDR, which is a proven evidence-based therapy that can help any individual with any traumatic experience or any kind of anxiety and depression. So I used to go to this therapist for 2 years.
Let me ask you, what does EMDR stand for?
So EMDR, it's eye movement desensitization reprocessing. So what happened in this process, you are going back to the event, traumatic event, every time in that session, and try to process that event. Because when a trauma happens to us, I'm not a professional in this case, but I'm just telling my own experience. So me and my therapist, what we were doing, we reprocessing those memories and bringing it back to the surface, because our brain works in a way, we are filing up all our memories very normally, if, for example, this session today with us. But when it's a case of trauma, our brain cannot process that, and it will be roaming around, for example, like a bubble in this room all the time. And so anything else can trigger it back and bring it back to the surface, and the person will suffer from those trauma, can have hallucination, can have anger, anxiety, sleeplessness, and even focus disorientations. So with this thing, it took me 2 years to revisit Farkhonda's incident. And for the first time, it was so hard that every time I was coming back from the therapy room, my husband is sitting there, he was taking me there, I was shaking and crying each time. And it took me months to come out of that. And right now, I'm sitting in front of all of you and can talk and actually explain about what happened to me and what I witnessed that and how I processed that memory.
So clearly an effective therapy for you.
Very effective.
What would you say in terms of the support that you received from your employer at that time versus the support that you receive now as an employee of the NHS, who would you say does a better job of making resources available to you?
Okay, so this is a very gray area. I don't want to be
difficult to speak
difficult to the BBC
current,
because at that time I was employee of BBC World Service in Afghanistan, and how BBC operate inside the different countries, for example, in Afghanistan or in the UK, is completely different. For here, I know that BBC has a support system for the well-being of all their journalists and employees, and they have different process, Karen. One of them is the assessment of your well-being. Doesn't matter if you are a war reporter, war correspondent, or you have work anxiety, like long hours, you don't like a story, you don't like one of the, for example, the platforms, TV, radio, or the website, they can rearrange those platforms for you. Right. They do it in the UK, but nothing like this happens in Afghanistan. Okay. So we had no support in Afghanistan. I was going through all this trauma, and basically in Afghanistan, we don't have a good...
How did an editor let you get out of a hospital bed and go to find a story?
That was my anger. That was my anger because I was feeling really helpless in that moment. Police didn't help me, the official didn't help me, and the ordinary people like shopkeepers or the taxi driver who was driving me home is killing a woman in front of me with that amount of anger. So I felt like I'm living in a forest with all these very angry animals that they can attack me, and that they did attack me. While I was reporting in Afghanistan, I was attacked by a knife, by a man who had a knife, and he attacked me just because I was not wearing proper hijab. My scarf was here. And regarding your second part of question about the NHS, the support system for the NHS, for the nurses, are really good because our life day to day, we are facing lots of difficult situation. For example, if you're a nurse in the ward, in A&E, or in intensive care, so your patient's condition can change any minutes, any hours. And one of those things is dying of a patient, processing the death of someone you cared for maybe days or months or maybe an year. So it would be very difficult for me as a nurse. My first patient's death was really hard for me. And me having all those traumas and all the background I had, it was really difficult. But at the same time, when I compare those two deaths, when I had from Afghanistan, people are in pieces in an explosion, and I'm just reporting them, innocent men, women, children. And now I have someone is dying in a hospital peacefully with the families around them. So that not only give a little bit of peace to those people to acknowledge and understand that grief, and even for me as a nurse, because, and apart from that, we have our peer colleagues to talk with us, and because they are going through the same situation and same condition as I. And we have therapists in every ward, in every settings. If we want, we can approach them and we can talk to them.
Right. The first responders have always done it very well. The police, the fireys in recent years, you know, medical. There's a real understanding that you're in the front line. But the Dart Centre and other research shows that, you know, the work we do as journalists is actually at the front line too. Sometimes we get there before the police, or we get there before you know, other responders. So, and that's something that's not, I think, well acknowledged in our industry, and needs to be acknowledged more. That we're frontline workers often.
But there's a question that hangs over all of this, very well intentioned, and it sounds really good on paper, but would it work in a war zone? Would these ideas work in Afghanistan? Do reporters in Afghanistan want these kind of interventions? Is there capacity for them?
I was listening to Tushima, actually. Many of the points that she mentioned it's very similar to my own experience when I was in Afghanistan, or I'm here working with women inside Afghanistan right now. because they are also very vulnerable, especially since 2021 when the Taliban administration came to power. So it really affected everyone's life in every way. 100% women's life. So they've been erased from the face of the society right now. So schools are shut, jobs are shut for them, universities are closed, and they can't do anything. But at the same time, these women want their voice to be raised, wants the world to know about their situation, what's happening, what is their struggle. And when I'm reporting on those subjects from Afghanistan, for example, right now, I cannot go back to Afghanistan. So I call them there and I find these women through WhatsApp, through social media groups, and through that secure lines that we have. We can talk to each other. And if there's something that I need to report about it, I have to go through this consent process much more cautiously and pay lots of attention to every details they say, and with the information they provide for me and pictures or whatever content they provide for me, I have to go through each of them with them, that what will be the effect of that, where this going to be published, who is our audience, what backlash that can have, and what Taliban's reaction would be to this one. So for me as a journalist, it made my life more difficult, but at the same time, it's making it more accurate and more secure and more, for example, audience center, because for me, as much my story is important, more than that is the safety of the person I'm interviewing is important. And even when I was in Afghanistan, with the local media, so we have international media in Afghanistan, like BBC, CNN, or Reuters, or AFP, and all of these journalists being trained, local journalists, as per these values in the international community. But we have our own media inside Afghanistan. And before the Taliban, we have more than 100 TV stations, more than 200 radio stations, and thousands of newspapers. And they had their own policies. And it was not as effective and as safe as international media like the BBC. For example, there was so many incidents that one of the TV stations were interviewing somebody, for example, a victim of rape, a woman who was a victim of rape, without her consent, that this will go not only on the radio, but on the website with her picture. And that put that woman in a very difficult situation within the society, within her family and everything.
So
and
you're saying one set of rules for the domestic market and a whole other set of rules for the foreign.
For the foreign.
Wow.
Yeah. So it depends. But at the end of the day, I think it's very important for every person, every journalist, that how they decide to cover a story and using their own sense of humbleness and trust and being impartial and think about that person's life. As Tushima mentioned, that I'm getting my story out, but how this is going to affect the person I'm interviewing.
And it's about ethics too. It's centering ethics as well.
Yeah.
And to Caitlin's point about it actually making you feel better, but it's most important. I really applaud. It's so courageous what you've done, Tushima, because that's not the way we have fundamentally and over time thought about how to do things. But handing back control to people who've been traumatized is a really empowering thing. It leads to better journalism. They are in a better shape. I love this idea, how we leave people. It's so important. So, and that idea of, are you comfortable with what we're doing? Constantly checking in, shutting things down if it's uncomfortable. One of the things I also like to do in my trauma-informed approach is afterwards. Okay.
But I will say two things there that is not necessarily just down to the journalists themselves to hard, soft. A commissioning editor can look at what they're assigning out, and even a freelance can say, I'll pick this up, now I'm going to pick this up. You can make certain priorities around what you're doing. I do want to open up to questions from the audience. So let us know if you've got something that you want to ask. But while you're thinking about that, I'm going to do my devil's advocate act and ask you, how would you counter some of these common management objections to promoting well-being practices? And this is not me saying any of this, the role-playing, please. But number one, we never had this when I was a reporter, and I'm fine. Why can't you just go to the pub like we did?
Because they're not fine. Yeah. Their divorces, their health, their all the things that happen to particularly older white men. But I would look at Dean Yates's book. He's not an old white man, but we've got older white men now really understanding what has happened. So I think those dinosaurs are just not seeing what's actually happening. And, unfortunately, there are too many dinosaurs in our industry at that level. But anyway, I think Toshima had something to say about that too.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, the body takes a toll. You can pretend like you are okay, or maybe not even realize that you have been affected by something, but that doesn't mean that if you are not addressing it, your body won't make you come to terms with that later. And so maybe it might look like you have digestive issues and you don't know how to connect it. Like, you won't be able to connect it to the fact of what you experienced on the job. Or you might have some sort of pain that just kind of comes out of nowhere. Like, if you are not taking the time to take care of yourself and put your mental health first, your body will make sure that it stops you. So that way you can start to try to address those things, even if you don't understand that that's where it could potentially be coming from.
Okay, devil number two. This is just women's nonsense. Why? It's just 4 women talking about this, and 3 women and a non-binary person. This is just this is feminism gone crazy. You're making this journalism too soft.
Does anybody in this room actually believe that's the case? But I do think I think it has taken, like a lot of women are more likely to take it seriously, I think, but I also think it's changing. Younger people have a much better handle on their mental health and understanding that they need to do something about it. And like I say, I think those were always the hard ones for me when I was doing peer support with the older white men who, or just older men more generally, who really did have that whole kind of, toughen up, princess, and it's fine. This is just what we do, blah blah. And but they know that it's changed. The conversation has changed dramatically. We still, there's still areas, pressure points where people aren't responding, but in the main, I think there's an understanding that we have to do something. And it is the physical that Toshima's been talking about, the way mental health and trauma and those kind of stresses affect the body are real. There are biochemical things that go on in the brain, but you get other illnesses from the mental health load that you're, it's extraordinary and it's real. So it's not just us.
Do you have any response to that?
Regarding this trauma, what Karen and Toshima emphasize on that about some people are trying to be open about what's going on, sit back and assess yourself and your feelings and acknowledge it. But there's a problem about that as well. From my experience working in the newsroom and working in an international organization like BBC, there's a stigma around it. Because if you sit back and say that, okay, well, I have these problems, I have emotional distress about this kind of stories, or this is what I'm going through it. One of the things the editors does that okay, so leave Bahar or leave Toshima aside because she can handle that. And you will be pushed to the corner slowly, and you will be forgotten. I'm telling this from my own experience and from many of my colleagues who are working at the BBC, because they are be labeled as troublemakers, people who can handle things, very emotional women, and making big deal about something. So this is the reason many of my own colleagues or my friends, we were not able to actually acknowledge our feelings and the distress we were going on all the time, because there was some editors, especially male member of our editors, they were saying, okay, don't give Bahar this story because she cannot handle it. Give it to this man. So this was becoming a culture. And right now it's a culture in BBC Persian service. I can speak about that because that's my experience. So you can't be comfortable about it. I found it more comfortable in NHS as a nurse, because you can express your emotion, you can talk to your peer colleagues, you can talk to your managers, and they understand. They try to find out some platform for you that you're more comfortable and slowly face all of those trauma. But in journalism, the competition is so high, and we have some top stories. For example, I was working at the newsroom, so we had 3 top stories to cover for the day, and then it was distributed by the chief editor there to some of our colleagues. And then when it was coming to the person who was actually expressing herself and talking about her traumas, they're saying, okay, we are not going to give this story to her because she cannot deliver it on time or because she is making trouble. You have to listen to that person. What's her problems? Rather than pushing it in the corner. So they are hiding these feelings.
There was quite an interesting court case in Australia where a journalist who had been a court reporter, she had been a criminal crime reporter, she had dealt with Melbourne's underworld, and they shoot one another in cafes at a very fast clip. So she had asked to be moved to a different area and had been able to go and work somewhere else for a different time, and then they moved her back. And over 10 years, she did everything she could within her organisation to try and look after herself and alert the bosses to the fact that I just can't keep doing this.
Yeah.
And ultimately, she took them to court. She won. She was given an okay payout. They appealed.
Questions, friends? Robin.
Just firstly, thanks so much for sharing. Oh, okay. Hello. Thanks so much for sharing with us. I personally found this panel just incredible, and your stories are fascinating, and it's very generous of you guys to share it all with us. I wondered, you kind of touched on it a little bit there, but I wondered how far away do you think we are from the recognition of some people by way of their identity being more affected by stories? So, there's a kind of a trend, which I think is a good thing generally at the moment, of people covering their own communities, and instead of sending a white reporter to cover a Black story, for example, having a Black reporter tell those stories. How far away do you think we are from understanding that also comes with an extra level of trauma? And it could be a small thing. It could be sending somebody who's just become a father to a story where a baby's been murdered, something like that. How far away do you think we are from recognizing that can have an effect?
So
that makes sense.
Have we reckoned with the layer of consequence to asking people with lived experience to cover lived experience?
Yeah, or even just sending a woman to cover the story, a misogynist murder, versus a man. There is a difference there, I think. And how far away are we from the industry and editors recognizing that it does have an extra burden on some people, I think.
I think it depends. Lots of different organisations do things very differently. And I think we need to also, that comes with a burden of, reporting on your own community, where you can feel as if you've betrayed your community sometimes because you're reporting on things that are, I think it's really hard. And I don't think it should be an all or one equation. I think we need to be much better at doing an assessment each and every time and going, okay, is this an appropriate one for a Black trans person to be doing, as opposed to, or I think communication and actually asking Tashima, it's just okay, we've got this story, what do you think? And you can say, I really, really want to do that, or it's just I'm not in a position to do so, or I can't for various reasons. So I think we shouldn't be saying it's only this way. We need to be much more flexible. And that's where trauma-informed training of managers and assignment editors and chiefs of staff, and those people who are actually making those decisions is really important. And just centering the people who are doing it is really important. I've covered a lot of things over my career that in retrospect, it would have been better to at least have input from somebody from that community, but they simply weren't there because we were, particularly in Australia, we're still a very white Anglo-Saxon industry. It's getting better marginally, but I've never been in that situation. So I imagine both Tashima and Bahar would probably have a better idea of what that feels like.
I think, sorry, Tashima, do you want to add something?
No, you can.
If you are from a community, a particular community, and you are assigned or you've been asked to report about that, particularly, for example, women's stories, which is my interest. Unless I'm refusing that, it's a good thing because you can add content to that. You have your own experience, you have your own interest on that story, being partial all the time. I think it's not a bad idea because when, for example, when I'm reporting about the situation of women in Afghanistan right now, struggling to get job, get education, get their freedom, and fighting Taliban administration, I have understanding of that because I can add the content of what is being to live in Afghanistan among those people, not only Taliban. The whole society is patriarchal society. It's anti-women society. So whatever you do, when I was stabbed in Afghanistan, it was not Taliban. It was ordinary people of that country. Those people stopped me because I was not wearing a proper hijab. So what is happening right now there, I can understand how intense it is and what more contents I can put in that story and deliver that story. I think that's also a good idea. But if, for example, Tashima wants to go and do a story about Afghanistan's women, she will add her perspective, a new perspective. She will see from a new window that I don't. I think both of them are good. We can have both sides.
Yeah, I agree with Bahar and Karen. I think the flip side of that is a little dangerous because if we only leave it up to editors who will be like, oh, well, you're Black and trans, and I don't think you are mentally fit to cover this story. Like in the US, that same thing already happens. Like with the 2020 Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of Black reporters were pushed out of covering their own communities off of the idea that they would be too emotional and wouldn't be able to report from an unbiased standpoint.
I'm going to start wrapping us up unless there's one last question. Good. I think there's something that's been playing in my mind that I just want to, I think it pulls the threads together. There's a seminar that I do at the start of term with new fellows about cultural sensitivity. And one of the anthropologists that we talk about defines masculine and feminine as cultural factors, which we always in our sessions say, okay, that's ridiculous. It's not masculine and feminine. It's competitive and collaborative. And I do think that there's a shift happening away from the competitive towards the collaborative, because collaborative is now our unique selling point. This is now what journalism can do differently to what anyone else can do with a phone, is stand up, send a tweet, make a video. Any individual can now share information. We're the only individuals who collaborate on sharing information, and we can have collaborative objectivity, and we can have collaborative well-being, and we can do things differently. And I do think the time for the ideas that you've spoken about has come, and I'm, as Robin and Hannah said, incredibly grateful for how willingly and openly you've all shared today. And I hope that for the audience, that has been a session that perhaps you had heard the how-tos, but if you needed the permissions, that chart changed as we were talking. The first poll changed from a third of the room to half of the room, and suddenly was willing to say, yeah, I've been at a point where I was ready to leave journalism. So thank you to our three. Thank you. Also, thank you to you for actually being willing to come and listen to this conversation. And the fact that people on a Saturday afternoon after lunch were willing to sit and talk about such significantly heavy stuff only reinforces my belief that the time for this conversation is here. And I think we just have to keep having it. Keep asking questions, keep moving forward. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Let's get pished.
Brilliant to